Ever since Pinky Apple Pie in Season 4 and all the entertaining interactions between Pinky's joyful antics, the apples trying to put on their very best behavior while falling flat at every turn, along with one of the catchiest songs in all of MLP becoming an instant hit in the fandom, I've been rather curious about what would happen if Applejack spent a day with the Pie family. After all, Maud's deadpan interactions with the main six in Season 4 was also an instant hit throughout the community, and we only got the briefest glimpse of the rest of the Pies back in Season 1. So when the writers introduced a holiday episode showing all the apples meeting with all the Pies, I could already tell there was potential for yet another instant hit. To start off, I actually took part in a first impressions video alongside Silverquill, Lightning Bliss, and Tarek Dragon where we brought up a lot of interesting discussion. So I'll post a link in the description for all those who want to hear more than what I'll be showing here today. And really, I don't think there was a single point where this episode dragged. A lot of the circumstances were predictable, but the solutions weren't quite so much. After all, how many stories have we seen with two families whose traditions don't mesh as well as everybody would have hoped? Along with the inevitable falling out followed by the lesson of putting aside your own expectations for the sake of the holiday. It's actually rather refreshing to see not one, but two characters going through a conflict in different ways that leads to more of an adult message about understanding. And while I could certainly spend a good deal of time praising this episode for enjoyable character moments, blink and you'll miss it reference jokes, and the random humor of Pinkie Pie herself, I'd actually like to focus on one particular element that didn't really hit me until thinking about this episode for a couple days. Having been at Nightmare Nights on the same weekend, I couldn't do my review within a few hours like I usually do. But in this case, I think it actually worked for the better since watching this episode multiple times gave me a different perspective. Looking back at the behavior of the apples as well as the behavior of the Pies, it's fairly obvious that Applejack's intrusive behavior would send the wrong message. After all, trying to force your own traditions onto someone else is more than enough of a reason to cause conflict. But I think this episode actually took it a step further in a very subtle way. When you take a look at the Pies' lifestyle and how they spend their hearthwarming, they really are living rather simply. They eat rock soup for dinner, carve rocks into figurines, and play a game of Find the Flag, which is nothing more than a piece of paper. They're using materials that are easily available right where they live. Now, when Applejack tries to set up her own version of hearthwarming, we see ribbons and lights and wreaths and candy canes and a real flag. There's no way the apples brought all of this decor with them, which suggests that Applejack had gone out in the middle of the night to fetch or even purchase these items since, as Applejack puts it,
Pinkie Pie's family never had a real hearthwarming.
Now, imagine for a moment, what if the Pie family never had anything more than what's readily available on their farm because they simply could not afford anything more than what's readily available on their farm? They're certainly deeply rooted in their traditions, and as we learn later on in the story, there's a good reason for it. But when you look at this episode with this bit of added perspective, suddenly there's a deeper layer to the message. When you consider the Pies' hearthwarming feast of rock soup and all the expressions on their faces when Applejack is trying her utmost to make the best of it, I'd like to emphasize that the apples have never really been that well off, but even so, the comparison here is rather intriguing, and the writers presented it in such a way as not to be front and center. If this was indeed the intended goal of the MLP staff, it would grant Pinkie Pie a bit more of my respect. She's so dedicated to spreading joy to all those around her, even in certain situations where it starts working against her. And looking back at her youth where there were no smiles amongst her family until the sonic rainbow, I think it's wonderful to see how far she's really come. Still, it's just an observation on this episode. And really, it could simply be that this story wasn't meant to have this deeper meaning to it, and I'm just overthinking things. Even so, I really have to appreciate episodes that make me think, while still having a lot of entertaining moments, some character development, a wonderful lesson, along with new characters that are quickly becoming fan favorites. All in all, a very worthwhile entry to the series. And for all those who are wondering why this episode about Hearthwarming Eve got released in October, I would guess that originally the second half of Season 5 was supposed to begin in the middle of October so that Hearthbreakers would get released in late November. But when someone discovered the 5-year anniversary date, it made far more sense to move everything else up a month. What do you think? I am Dr. Wolf, and I look forward to hearing from you.
Hey! I was gonna say that!